Hi everyone, welcome to the January 5th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined in just a moment by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Well, first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. This is our first show of 2021. 2020's in the books. It's put to rest. I think we're all moving forward into the new year with some high hopes of things getting a little better. I think we have plenty to look forward to, especially in the racing world, and that's really the theme of this show, as we'll be talking about some Derby preps, some horses that look promising moving towards the Derby Trail, but also some maiden and allowance winners that I think might be worth following. Plenty of 3-year-olds that seem to be moving up, as well as some 4-year-olds that are newly turned 4-year-olds with the new year just occurring that might be worth looking forward to as they move up to allowance and stakes company in the future. But we'll talk about all of that in a little bit. First, I just want to welcome in my co-host, Craig. Happy New Year to you, and how are things going in these first few days of 2021?
Yeah, so far so good in 2021. I think we got some good racing to talk about. And, as you mentioned, things probably can't get much worse than 2020. So going to try to be optimistic and hope things go as planned and we can get back to a more normal life. And the one thing I'm really looking forward to as a racing fan is a more normal Triple Crown season where it's back to the usual schedule that we have and early 3-year-olds running in the Kentucky Derby, not ones who are nearly 4.
No, I completely agree with that. It will be refreshing to have things come back to some semblance of a normal calendar year. A lot of these 2-year-olds, were able to have full seasons despite the pandemic. So I think even if some of them had slightly delayed schedules, we're seeing a lot of them coming out of the woodwork at this point. And I think we'll see a pretty normal Derby prep season, all things considered, as long as everything keeps moving on the current track. So let's keep our fingers crossed in that regard. And we're going to start things off with one of those Derby preps beginning out in California at Santa Anita. That was the Grade 3 Sham, which was run on Saturday, and the hopefully well-named Life is Good got the job done here. This is a horse that there was a lot of chatter about after he made his debut at the end of 2020 when he won by nearly 10 lengths over a sprint distance, did that very impressively. This was his first 2-turn test, and he certainly passed it. I think there was a bit of a dichotomy between the visual impression that the horse left and the time as it relates to the other races that day.
Yeah, it was a fast race. I didn't check, to be honest, but I think it's the fastest race we've seen from a horse of this crop so far with a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. He certainly did it pretty easily. I don't want to get in. I mean, not that I don't want to get into it, but I just don't know what it means when a jockey wraps up like that, how much numerically it has an effect. My guess is not very much, but we'll see, I guess. I thought Life is Good ran well. I thought the runner-up ran it very well also. Another Bob Baffert trained Medina Spirit. He got a 118 in second. It was kind of, they're stablemate, so I wasn't really surprised. But Medina Spirit actually broke right on top and looked full of run and just kind of ceded the lead to Life is Good. And make no mistake, he was getting to him late. How much of that was Mike Smith wrapping up on the horse and how much was it him getting tired? That's hard for me to say.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people saying that Mike Smith went easy on this horse and he intended to only win by 3/4 of a length. Personally, I didn't see that at all. This horse was visibly shortening stride at the end of the race. Mike was getting into him, like he got a little bit nervous right at the end because Medina Spirit was really coming at him. I think a lot of that was the fact that Life is Good was just kind of shutting down in the last eighth of a mile. And this horse, there's no doubt he's got a ton of talent. He showed that in his debut when he ran an even faster race here. I think the real question is the distance, and is he or will he develop into a true Kentucky Derby kind of contender? And I'm pretty skeptical about that. He is a son of Into Mischief. We saw last year with Authentic and all of his other overachieving progeny. They can do really anything, but there is plenty of sprint pedigree on the dam side for Life is Good, really sprinter miler pedigree. And given the visual impression here and just his overall nature, he's a very headstrong horse. We saw it in the first eighth of a mile of this race. Mike Smith could have elected to rate off Medina Spirit, but the horse just dragged him up into the lead. If you watch some of his morning morning training. He's just one of these unrateable horses, and that usually doesn't bode well for a horse stretching out further in distance. And I think we saw the toll that headstrong nature took on him at the end of this race. So I'm a little bit skeptical of him going farther, but like I said, he is very talented, and whether he turns out to be a 7 furlong to a mile kind of horse or a mile and a quarter horse, he's going to be winning some pretty big races this year once Bob Baffert figures out what he wants to do. But like you, I was pretty impressed by Medina Spirit, the runner-up. This horse was just relentless. I mean, he was under a pretty hard drive from the 3/8 of a mile, the last 3/8 of a mile of this race, and he just kept on coming at Life is Good. It's kind of funny. This horse has really no pedigree at all. He's a son of Protonico. The dam is by Brilliant Speed. There's really not a whole lot of production going deeper in the female family. He was a pretty cheap yearling purchase for a Bob Baffert runner, but he looks to have some talent.
He does. I did want to mention the pace a little in this race. It was on the quick side, so I mean, I guess you could say Life is Good had reason to be tiring a little bit, but it's also, as you said, he's pretty headstrong. So while it wasn't quite quick enough that any fractions are coded in red in our past performances, he definitely wasn't setting in an easy lead while on top by 3 or 4 lengths the whole way. And personally, that's not something I like to see. I don't like to see horses open up that big gap because it usually means that they're not able to be controlled and they're running off. And I'd rather see him rate a little better as distances get longer. So as you said, very good horse. He's going to be interesting to follow, but he's one I'm probably looking to take a shot against when he runs into some tougher competition. And particularly a lot of people keep bringing up Authentic from last year. And it's just a recency bias there. I don't like projecting what happens with one horse onto another completely different horse.
I completely agree with that. I think it's comparing apples and oranges. Authentic, they were making those claims about him at a completely different point in his career, a different point in his development. We don't yet know that much about Life is Good, and I think we'll learn a lot more when he gets a bigger test next time. I'm sure he'll be going a longer distance in his next start, so we'll see how he handles it. The race right before the Sham was the other graded stakes race at Santa Anita on Saturday. That was the Grade 2 San Gabriel, going a mile and an eighth on the turf course. And I believe this one produced the highest TimeformUS speed figure of last weekend, as another twist of fate who has been an admirable runner on really every surface that he tries. He was on the Derby Trail last year. He handled synth early in his career. Now he's a turf horse for Peter Miller. But he just has a high level of ability no matter what he's running over. And he showed that here, stalking a pretty honest pace and just drawing off with authority in the lane.
Yeah, he's a 5-year-old, newly turned 5-year-old, obviously, who was making just his 10th start. So he's obviously had some issues, but he's won 5 of those. And I thought he was super impressive on Saturday. He's a horse we had talked about out of the Seabiscuit last time, where he was involved in a race that, though we didn't have pace figures, surely had the look of a race that completely fell apart. And he was the only horse that did any running late that was anywhere near that pace. And he really backed it up here. He got a 125 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. He tracked the fast pace set by Bob and Jackie and was just able to put that one away and draw away with ease. The one caveat I would give is it did appear to be really tough to make up any kind of ground on the turf course on Saturday. But that said, I still think it was a big effort by another twist of fate.
I completely agree. This horse ran very well. I don't think we mentioned it. The speed figure that he received was a 125. That is solidly grade 2, bordering on grade 1 level for these horses. So that's a really nice number for another twist of fate in just his second turf start. And in addition to what you said about the pace in that Seabiscuit last time for another twist of fate, there was also a horse that I think got pulled up on the far turn and kind of interfered with another twist of fate just a little bit. He lost some momentum in that incident. So that hindered him even more in the Seabiscuit. And I just think it's going to show that maybe turf is what he's probably wanted all along. No surprise, he's the son of Scat Daddy. So I think he's got a big future on this surface for Peter Miller. The real no-show in this race was the last place finisher, who was the even money favorite, Count Again. He was the winner of the Seabiscuit, so impressively coming from way back. I don't really know what happened. I saw a lot of speculation immediately after the race that the horse might have bled because if you're not aware, all of these graded stakes races that are taking place, or I think all stakes races taking place in California, New York, and a number of other circuits are being conducted without Lasix. So that's a lot of these horses coming off Lasix for the first time in a very long time. If they're older horses, the 2-year-olds obviously raced without Lasix last year, but a lot of these horses that are 3-year-olds and up, 4-year-olds and up now in 2021, they're racing without Lasix for the first time. Though I did see Steve Bick just tweet something about having a conversation with Phil D'Amato, who said that Count Again did not bleed in this race. So I think it's a bit of a mystery as to what happened with him. But he was kind of the perplexing no-show in this race.
Yeah, I had seen those as well. Frankly, I'm glad to hear that he didn't bleed. Hopefully there's not something else physically wrong and he just ran a clunker. But it's definitely something, unfortunately, we're going to have to keep an eye out on as handicappers in this game. The rules are changing and you have to adapt. We're going to have spots where horses just don't run and it's always going to be possible they bleed. And it's just one more thing we have to be on our toes for.
Yeah, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent on this, but one thing I'll say about the Lasix issue is I was kind of shocked thinking about it at the end of this past year, how we heard basically nothing about there being any incident with any 2-year-old running without Lasix last year. I mean, I don't know if you saw reporting on it. I certainly didn't. The only thing that I really saw is trainers saying positive things about how they could run their horses more often without Lasix. Now, obviously, maybe there's a little bit more risk with an older horse who's been using Lasix coming off it, having a bleeding issue than a 2-year-old who doesn't have all that wear and tear of racing under their belts. But still, I'm a little bit skeptical that it's going to be as big of an issue as some people are making it out to be. We'll see, obviously, as things play out in the coming months.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not a proponent of Lasix. I'm old enough to remember the game before Lasix was a big deal. And I do think it gives an edge to runners who use it. And it kind of forces horses that don't need Lasix to run on it, or they're running at a disadvantage. Now, I guess there are some positives to Lasix use. Horsemen certainly seem to like it. So it's just something we're going to have to see how it plays out. And as handicappers, there's really nothing we can do about it. So it's just a good idea to make sure you're aware of the rules in the various jurisdictions and see whether your horse is going to be on it or not.
Sticking with the theme of Peter Miller runners, on Friday at Santa Anita, we saw the Grade 2 Joe Hernandez going 6.5 furlongs on that newly built extension to the turf course. And Hembry, who was making his first start off the claim for Peter Miller, claimed away from Mike Maker. He won this race, getting back to some of the good form that we saw from him, I would say going back to early last season, but even going back a couple of years when he was running in one-turn races for Mike Maker and achieving these kinds of speed figures. Well, Peter Miller got him back to that best form here, but I think the real story, as it often is in these turf sprints, was the ride that Joel Rosario gave this horse.
Yeah, it was quite an effort from Joel Rosario. I mean, it's almost astounding to me that he was allowed to go off at the 5-1 price that he did just because of Joel Rosario. If you forgot everything else about the race, you just know this is where he really shines. I mean, he certainly rides well in plenty other races, but his timing always seems impeccable. He seems to save all the ground. And on top of that, he was coming in with a horse who basically on our speed figures was the fastest horse anyway. So just a really good ride from him. And I think Hembry is going to be one of those. He's particularly going to enjoy the longer sprints that they're able to run at Santa Anita with this new chute. They've been running 6 and 6.5, and just a big effort from him. He got a 122 TimeformUS speed figure, which is just a little bit higher than he had run his last couple times on turf. Unfortunately, we don't have pace figures for these yet. It is something that as we build up more and more data, we will add them in. But for now, I just think it was a solid effort. The speed horses didn't run particularly well, and it's just one of those, I think you're going to have to look at the flow of the races. But, you know, it's not a race where I think the pace was just crazy fast, despite looking at the raw fractions. It was a fast course. It's certainly no down the hill course, and I obviously have to throw that out the window when making figures for these, but just a good effort. It's going to be interesting to follow these 6.5 races, and it's still a unique course. It's not the hill, but I wouldn't be surprised if we get some horse for course angles with this one as well.
Yeah, I saw some people bemoaning after the race that Peter Miller had pulled off some kind of miracle with this horse. I don't think it was some miracle off the claim. I think it was a pretty shrewd claim because Hembry's been a really nice horse for a number of seasons now. And as you said, he was the fastest horse coming into this race. He runs over a variety of distances. He's incredibly versatile and he's pretty consistent overall. I know he doesn't always win. He actually doesn't win that often, but he's always right there at the ends of his races. And I just think it was a smart claim because we've talked about this California turf sprint division over the past year, and they're just not achieving the kinds of speed figures that suggest that they'd be formidable if a really good East Coast shipper came over. And not that Hembry's the best turf sprinter out there, but he really just had to transfer some of his best form from Mike Maker out to the West Coast, and he was able to do that with this great ride that he got from Joel Rosario. So I don't think it was some huge shock that this horse ran as well as he did.
No, I also think the placement was great because if you look through Hembry's lifetime past performances, I think it's pretty clear he prefers one turn, which he got here. Now, he does run well at 2 turns and some good company, but it was an opportunity to take advantage of that new shoot and the new distances they can run, and I think it just fit him to a T.
Now, I was a little bit less impressed by the other graded stakes that they ran at Santa Anita this past week. That was on Sunday, the Grade 2 Santa Ynez for the 3-year-old fillies. Calypso is the winner here for Bob Baffert, turning back in distance from the Starlet. I'm just not really sure how much quality there really is in this crew of 3-year-old fillies right now.
No, Calypso, I mean, she went off the heavy favorite off her race last time where she was part of that really fast pace that got a huge upgrade. And she basically ran the same speed figure winning this time. She got a 105 last time, which was in a pretty crazy result. I think 14 points higher than the winner of that race. She got a 104 here and running against a mean, and I'm guessing at a 104, educated guessing because my assistant does Santa Anita and I don't have his Sunday work yet, but it looked like a pretty easy day to do. And yeah, 104, it's okay, but it's nothing that's going to get the juices flowing as far as horses moving on and being top of the division. I do still want to see what Frosteria can do back around 2 turns. I don't think 1 turn is really what she's cut out for. So I thought she ran okay. So out of this group, she's the one I will watch going forward.
No, I agree with that about Frosteria. I mean, we had talked about that maiden race she was exiting, which was won by Moonlight Doro, who seems like a very promising filly, who they're probably looking to go 2 turns in the future. I imagine that's why she wasn't in this race. But Frosteria, she's still a maiden. She's only... she's run 4 times, but she's finished second in all 4 starts. Obviously got the graded stakes placing here, but I kind of agree with you. If we're looking for horses that could be competitive on the Kentucky Oaks Trail, she's the one that I'd be most interested in. That's all the stakes action from last week at Santa Anita, but we're going to talk about a few maiden races that caught the eye. Actually, about 4 of them, beginning with a race on Sunday. This was a maiden optional claiming race for 4-year-old fillies and up, kind of like one of those auction races that you see in New York sometimes, horses that sold for a certain amount of money or less. I think the threshold here was pretty high, horses who sold for $150,000 or less, or it could be in the claiming tag, or there was some other condition about the number of starts. Regardless, there were a couple of first-time starters who were highly touted coming into this race, and one of them did win. That was Pharaoh's Heart, and she earned a pretty solid speed figure, even for a 4-year-old in the debut.
Yeah, I would guess she's going to get about a 108, same deal. It's from that same card that we just talked about, so it's not official, but it's going to be that give or take a point. And yeah, I thought she ran very well. The daughter of American Pharaoh, obviously, didn't debut until 4, so you got to wonder what happened. But she did take some money for a trainer who's not known for running his horses all that great first time out. He doesn't win at a high percentage in Mark Glatt, but she certainly ran well, winning off, I forget by how many lengths she won by. I think it was almost 2, but it looked pretty easy doing it, and that's certainly a good figure. So any improvement, and she's not too far from being a stakes filly.
Yeah, and she's one who's definitely bred to stretch out in distance. She's by American Pharaoh. The dam side, it's a lot of Edward P. Evans dams. The dam is a full sister to Minnie Sermon, who was a stakes-winning dirt router. I think she won the race like the Top Flight or something like that. So interesting to see where this filly goes from here. The other maiden race to talk about on Sunday was one for the 3-year-old males. That was won pretty impressively by Roman Centurion. He is another horse that was coming out of that maiden race that was won by Life is Good in late 2020. We've now seen 3 horses come out of that race to win, including Life is Good and the runner-up, we talked about on, I think, the podcast last week. But Roman Centurion was stretching out to the 2 turns here, and it looked like he really relished the extra ground.
Yeah, once again, another race from that Sunday card. And this was the only 2-turn race, but I think it's going to get about the same 108 as the horse the filly we just talked about. It was impressive visually, and it's impressive numerically. I mean, we already talked about Life is Good, who ran a 120. This horse is only 12 points below that, and certainly appears to be one who could handle more ground. So I liked what I saw from Roman Centurion.
Yeah, I was very impressed by this horse. He didn't show too much in the sprint debut, but he really is bred to go longer. He's by Empire Maker, and I just love the way that this horse leveled off at the end of the race. He got geared up around the far turn, made a long, sustained rally to reach contention, and in the final eighth of a mile, once he hit the front, some horses might idle a little bit when they're inexperienced in that position, but he just continued to run away from that field, and if you look at the gallop out, he continued to open up about 10 or 12 lengths. I don't like to make a lot of gallop outs, but this horse was really running into the clubhouse turn, and I mean, I don't want to put too many expectations on a horse that just broke its maiden, but he's already running as fast as a lot of horses that are competing in graded stakes races at this time of year, and I would venture a guess that this turns out to be a big player on the Derby trail. He's got to continue developing, but I just love what I saw from this horse, and the pedigree, it's there to back him up, because even aside from Empire Maker on the top side, on the dam side, this is just a Phipps-bred family through and through. His second dam is Finder's Fee. It's the family of Heavenly Prize going a little bit deeper. This just looks like a horse that has a really big future ahead of him.
Yeah, and that's it. I think this was a pretty strong maiden race, too. I think the second and third place horses are pretty good. I would expect them to break their maidens this meet at Santa Anita. So strong race, and he won it easily. And from a pace figure perspective, the pace was honest, maybe slightly fast, but nothing that just set up this huge late run like the race was falling apart. He was just flying at the end.
Talking about a couple more maiden breakers from Santa Anita this past week, let's go back to Friday's card, where the last race of the day was a race for newly turned 3-year-olds and the debuting Rock Your World, who was well touted, going off at 2-1 here. He got the job done for John Sadler and Joel Rosario, doing it pretty well. I saw some reporting after the race they might be thinking about trying the dirt with him in the future, but he looks like a fairly talented turf horse based on the evidence of this first start.
Yeah, it was a big effort from him. John Sadler does okay with first-time starters, but it's not something that he just has them fully cranked all the time. And this horse ran a big race. He got a 105 TimeformUS speed figure for the win. Did it pretty easily. So it's not a whole lot to say about it. It was over that new course, but it wasn't too tough to make the speed figures, in my opinion, that day. So I think it's a solid number for a 3-year-old debuter in particular.
Yeah, and I'll just say, looking at this horse's pedigree, I would say it does lean a little more turf. He's a son of Candy Ride, who's a versatile sire, but he's a full brother to She's Our Charm, who is a turf horse that you've probably seen racing in California. She competes in some stakes races, high-level optional claiming races, and she's strictly turf, and there's a lot of turf on the dam side, so I'm a little skeptical about this one moving to dirt if they choose to go that route, but he does look like a fast and talented turf horse. As does a horse that we saw on Thursday's card at Santa Anita. Now, this horse was competing as a 3-year-old on Thursday, but that was in 2020. So now as we speak about this horse is a 4-year-old. So just take that as you digest the speed figure, which was a 109. But Sir Oliver looked similarly good to Rock Your World in winning his debut here, going that 6.5 furlong distance. And this horse's pedigree kind of gave me a chuckle because he is obscurely bred.
I honestly had to look this one up when you saw, because as I mentioned, I don't do the figures for Santa Anita and it didn't jump out, but you put it on our rundown. I was surprised to see it had run a 109. I didn't pay much attention to the race on Thursday later in the day, so I missed this one. But yeah, that's certainly a big effort from a debuter, even if he is now a 4-year-old. I mean, a 109 is a big effort, and I'll be curious to hear. If do you have anything else to add to the breeding, what you could expect from him going forward?
Well, I mean, I'll just say, this race caught my eye because of the speed figure and the fact that watching the race, he did win so impressively. He wasn't as geared down as Rock Your World was in that similar situation the next day, but he was just running away from this field at the end. Looked like a horse that was loving the turf course out there, one with potential to go forward in the future. And I did not recognize the name of the sire, Oliver's Tail. Looked him up. This is actually the only foal that Oliver's Tail has ever produced. I don't think he's a commercial stallion. He raced for the same connections as this horse, Sir Oliver, and he's probably just on a farm somewhere, and they bred one of their mares to a horse that they've got on the farm. So he produced a real runner here, the only foal that he's got on the racetrack. So I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just pulled up Oliver's Tail in our breeding ratings, and somewhere in his career, he ran a 123 TimeformUS speed figure. He won 4 out of 9 starts. So he certainly had some talent. And this was for a trainer who definitely doesn't win very often. He was overlooked in the wagering. I think he paid $30. So when these kinds surprise, it's hard to say what you're dealing with, but I would expect him to run big next time just based on the visual, and the figure certainly backed that up.
Yeah, Oliver's Tail was actually a specialist on the downhill course at Santa Anita, going the 6.5 furlong distance. I looked up some of his races, so just kind of funny that his only foal wins on the new course. And I wonder if maybe they'll breed a few more mares to that sire, as long as he's still doing well. I don't think he's that old, as long as they still got him, because apparently he can produce a runner. Move on to our next venue. That's Gulfstream Park, where they did run a Derby prep last weekend on Saturday. That was the Mucho Macho Man going a mile. It's the first in their series of preps leading up to the Florida Derby. The winner here was Mutasabek for Todd Pletcher. This one is making the move from turf to dirt after competing in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf at the end of last year. I would say, based on the races we've seen from him, he might be better on the dirt.
Yeah, that was a pretty good effort from him. I mean, if you forget his start in the Hopeful, where he just ran into Jackie's Warrior, I liked what I saw. He got a 111 TimeformUS speed figure for the win, but what I liked more was how he was able to stay back up close to the pace, something he wasn't able to do in 2 turf tries. So for me, that gives me the same impression that he's a horse who is going to like the dirt better. His best figures have come on the dirt. So for me, yeah, let's keep him on the dirt and see what he has. But like I said, I did like him staying up closer than he had been in recent starts.
Yeah, it was nice to see him have that return to the tactical speed that he showed in his dirt races, because he really had no speed at all in those turf events. I'm not really sure what was behind him here. It was a race that was mostly dominated towards the front end. We didn't see too much running going on at the back of the pack. I know his main rival, Pick and Time, was badly hampered at the start, but he really didn't run well here. So I'm not sure if I really want horses coming out of this race moving forward as we go on to the subsequent graded stakes races that they'll run on the Derby Trail in Florida, but Mutasabek seems okay. I'm not sure that this is the horse that's going to win the Derby for Todd Pletcher, but he's certainly progressing, and I think he's now back on the right surface.
Yeah, I will say when I made the figure, I was just a little bit leery because the top 3 all made pretty big jumps, but the time fit. I time all the mile dirt races because Trackus still has issues with those, and I actually wound up adjusting the earlier mile race quite a bit faster than what the clock showed because it was just totally mistimed. But that said, it fit in line. Once I did that, the figures lined up, and we're just going to see this with 3-year-olds. It's something you have to get used to, that sometimes they make big jumps when you're not expecting it, and it's something to keep in mind as a bettor too.
I think we saw the fastest horses racing last weekend at Gulfstream on Friday in the Janus Stakes as Imprimis and Extravagant Kid faced off here. They were the 2 favorites. Obviously, Imprimis was coming out of that rough trip, let's say, in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. That's probably being kind to the trip he got. He was badly sawed off at the stretch and really lost all chance. I don't know where he was going to finish that day, but certainly not as far back as he did if he had gotten a clean run. But he got back to the races here and really rebounded with a nice effort to get up for the win over Extravagant Kid. These two showed up with good efforts.
Yeah, it was a nice win for Imprimis. It got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure. This was about as big a drop of class as you're ever going to see, I think, from that Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint to this. Outside Extravagant Kid, there wasn't a whole bunch in here to be afraid of, and he got the job done. He went off at 4-5. Some might argue that's an overlay based on his Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint and the trip he had. I just watched it as a fan. I just didn't really see any value in there, but good ride by Irad Ortiz, well-timed as he usually does, and got the job done.
Yeah, if you were watching this race live, you could have gotten a little bit nervous that that long shot leader, the Critical Way, was going to pull it off, because both of the favorites were left with quite a bit to do in the last eighth of a mile, but the complexion changed right at the end, and they got up to complete the exact in the order that you would expect. Moving back to the 3-year-olds on Saturday, we saw a few races for the 3-year-olds on the turf and the dirt, sprinting and going long. But the one other one to highlight, at least in my opinion, was the Ginger Brew for the 3-year-old fillies, as the Todd Pletcher trained Con Lima improved her record now to 2 for 2 on the turf, and both of her victories on this surface have been very visually impressive. I'm not sure what she's beating in these races, but she's certainly doing it the right way.
She is. She got a 97 when she tried turf for the first time, and she got a 101 this time, jumping in the stakes company. She obviously goes to the front. She's done that both times. She hasn't really been challenged much. She did get a brief challenge around the turn, but repulsed it pretty easily and drew away. So good horse. I mean, she's going to have to grow some, figure-wise to be a real contender in the division, but she's done nothing wrong yet. And as I just mentioned, it's not surprising when these 3-year-olds jump up race to race and keep improving. So definitely one with some promise.
Yeah, I would agree with that. She looked pretty good to me. She ran a faster race than the male earlier on the card. I think it was on a different rail setting. You can correct me if I'm wrong about that. Going the same distance, Kentucky Pharaoh. Also, maybe that was a weaker race. But she looked pretty good to me against the fillies here. I also want to talk about another horse that Todd Pletcher ran on Saturday in a maiden race. This one was actually the race right before the Ginger Brew, as Win From Within finally got on turf for the first time. I know this was a horse that Todd Pletcher had been trying to get on the turf last summer. He was reined off in that With Anticipation that was ultimately won by Fire at Will, who clearly went on to do some nice things on turf, winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. But Win From Within did make that turf debut here and certainly took to it well, as did the runner-up in this race, Floriform. They drew well clear of the rest of the field.
They did. I did want to ask, have they already given Todd Pletcher the leading trainer award in the winner's circle after one of these races? 'Cause it feels like he's winning about 4 races a day. I'm sure he's not, but I think every race we're talking about, he's won all but one of them maybe. A 99 from From Within. Good effort, especially when you consider it was from the 12 hole. I do think he got a bit of an advantageous trip. Somehow he was allowed to get from way outside over to the inside in a slow pace figure, only a 91. But from there, he did everything right. And I don't want to punish a horse too much for getting a good trip. It's possible just his natural speed made him into a good trip. So, I don't want to knock a horse clearing from the 12 hole. It's not easy to do. But I do think he benefited a bit from the lack of aggressiveness from some of the other riders in here.
Yeah, the pace definitely helped him. And it helped really both of the top 2 finishers who were up front throughout, but they both really took to the turf in their turf debuts. Both Win From Within and Floriform. They're each sons of Into Mischief, who's such a versatile sire. I don't think we have to heap more accolades on him, but they both had nice turf pedigrees on the dam side, and they ran to those here. So we'll see. Floriform's got to break his maiden next time out, but I think both of these horses have some ability on the turf.
Yeah, and I will mention it was 9 lengths back to the 3rd place horse, and when you see those big gaps on turf, it's usually a pretty good sign that there was some real quality up front.
Let's move on to our final venue of this podcast, that being back to New York at Aqueduct. where they ran one Derby prep last weekend. That was on New Year's Day, Friday, in the Jerome, going the one-turn mile. And it was the park shipper, Capo Kane, who was able to pull off the upset.
Yeah, that was he definitely took some money, which surprised me a little bit from the 12-1 morning line, which I'm not knocking at all because I thought he would have been every bit of that. But he took a lot of cash and he proved that it was smart money as he just romped in this field, went right to the front, drew away, got a 10. Final time figure was 101. The overall figure was a 99. I did want to get your take. The pace was definitely a little bit on the slow side, so he benefited from that. And I did want to hear how you thought the track was playing.
Yeah, that was a day where it seemed like speed had maybe a slight advantage. It was hard to know from day to day if there was really any consistency in the course because we got a ton of rain this past week. I believe there was a wet track on Thursday and there were more wet tracks on Saturday and Sunday. But the Friday card, it did seem like you wanted to be forwardly placed. I wouldn't say it was a rail bias or anything like that. I saw horses winning all over the track, but you were probably best to be forwardly placed. That said, I think the slow pace helped this horse, and also the fact that a lot of those behind him, they just appeared to not get the distance. I know I had questions about the favorite Swill getting the distance after his performance at the Kentucky Jockey Club. He took another step backwards here. Eagle Orb, the New York bred, he looks like one that really doesn't want to go this far either. So I think that helped Capo Kane draw away from the field at the end. On Saturday at Aqueduct, they ran the Gravesend, going 6.5 furlongs for the older sprinters on the dirt. It's just a pretty solid field of hard-knocking runners, some New York bred, some horses moving up out of some fast optional claiming races, and a returning Happy Farm who had run some big races for Jason Service before obviously winding up in a new barn now. But it was Pete's play call off the claim for Rudy Rodriguez who got the job done here, stalking what was a pretty slow pace.
It was a slow pace. That was a theme in the stakes. We're not going to talk about the Sunday one at Aqueduct, but it was also a very slow pace, much like this one. And decent effort from Pete's play call. I do think he benefited greatly from that pace. I think probably the best horse in here was Stan the Man. But this is the third time in a row he's found himself in a race that we're going to have coated in blue fractions. Someday he's going to get some pace to run into. But since he gets bet most of the time in these spots, it's hard to say if you'll ever really get some value from a guy like him because he's always going to have trouble when the pace is slow. But I do think he is the best one here. I was really disappointed in Happy Farm. It was his first start off a long layoff, so maybe Linda Rice can get him going in the right direction. But he sure didn't show much here at all.
No, I was frankly a little surprised that Happy Farm was as low as 3-1. He was one of the more amazing miracles that was pulled off by Jason Service as the horse that he claimed out of some cheaper races, who eventually was running competitively in graded stakes. He appears to no longer have that ability based on his return here, but as you said, maybe he can do better for Linda Rice in the future. Pete's play call, I don't think he really improved much at all off the claim for Rudy. He had been in good form for prior barns. He was with, I think, Mike Maker, then he was with John Toscano running fast figures. So I think he just got the right trip and ran his race here. Like you, I think Stan the Man probably ran the best race. He just always seems to show up regardless of track condition or distance, but he does need a little bit of pace in these shorter races, and he just didn't get it here.
I should mention this was one of our races that gets a pace-adjusted figure. The final time was only 110, the figure, but the overall speed figures were upgraded. Depending on the trip, the horse got anywhere from about 4 to 8 or 9 points in here.
One more race to talk about from last week that was also on the Saturday card at Aqueduct, run over that muddy track, was the 6th race, run 2 before that Gravesend. A New York bred maiden for the newly termed 3-year-old fillies, going 6 furlongs, and a first-time starter that won here for Danny Gargan, looking very impressive. Breakfast at Bonnie's. 101 TimeformUS speed figure for this one. I think that's pretty encouraging for a New York bred in its debut.
Yeah, it seems like on our show we're talking about Laubin quite a bit. He's just every week we're talking about a new runner that debuts that's out, by Laubin, and she was yet another one. That 101 certainly a big figure. She did it for Danny Gargan, a guy who doesn't win a whole lot first out, but certainly the word was out. She got bet down to 2-1, second choice behind Jill's Hot Mess, and that one actually repeated her figure from last time when she had run a 90. She got a 91 here, so I don't think the 101 figure is any fluke when you look at the chart. She's certainly promising for a New York bred, and who knows? I mean, that kind of run first out, she could be an open company type of horse.
Yeah, Jill's a Hot Mess was the heavy favorite here after finishing second in a stakes in her prior start to Laubound on a Prayer, continuing the theme, another Laubound who won that race. But she, as you said, she ran pretty well here to be second because the pace did kind of fall apart behind these horses. You had closers getting up for the minor awards, but among these two speeds, Breakfast at Bonnie's just easily put away Jill's a Hot Mess, and you could see coming off the far turn, she was just gobbling up the ground under very little encouragement from Kendrick Carmouche, and she easily ran away from this field, was geared down at the end. As a daughter of a Lauban, you have to think that she'll be able to go a little bit farther, and there is real pedigree on the dam side for this filly. Her dam is a full sister to Closing Argument, who was a pretty good horse a number of years ago. I think he was second in the Kentucky Derby. He ran well in a few Derby preps. So this one certainly has some pedigree to go longer, and based on the evidence of this race, she'll do some real damage against the New York breds, assuming that they don't get ambitious and try open company. Well, that's all the racing to look back at for this week. Stay tuned this week later, even on Friday, when we do the TimeformUS forecast. I know that we've missed a couple of those with the holidays occurring on Fridays the last couple of weekends, but we'll resume our 2 podcasts a week starting in the new year, and we'll do that TimeformUS forecast on Friday. Haven't looked too much at what stakes are on tap for this weekend, but I'm sure we'll find some interesting things to talk about. Thanks for listening this week, everybody. Wishing you a happy new year. All the best of luck in 2021. Remember, you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for that TimeformUS forecast on Friday.